River Run, past Eve and Adams, from swerve of shore to bend of bay, brings us by a commodious vicus of recirculation not to Howth Castle and environs, but to the long wet lanes of Norfolk, the hedgerows leaning over like old men pissing after a visit to the pub, the mud recent with rain and shining as though the sky had dropped its mirrors down into the puddles. The road wound toward the old parish church, whose steeple clutched at the low clouds with the desperation of a Tarkovsky fan begging heaven to notice him at last. 4 shadows stretched along the lane, long and wavering, as though they were already ghosts rehearsing their hauntings. The doctor led, his coat flapping, his hat tilted, as though even gravity bent differently around him. Beside him Penny walked, her jaw tight with an unease she would not yet voice. Margaret came next, her handbag clutched to her like scripture, while Richard, pale and ailing, shuffled in a state of semi-detached obedience to the group, as though his body were no longer quite his to command. But behind them, deliberate, unhurried, came the 5th, its shadow elongated by the pewter dusk. The figure wore a hood drawn low, its shape heavy and anonymous, its chest marked by a great cross that swung rhythmically like a pendulum, measuring not time but intent. Its footfalls were the punctuation marks in the sentence of their walk. Penny leaned close to the doctor. "Doctor?" "Yes, Penny?" He did not turn, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "I think there's something following us." "I think it's that monk again," he said, as though stating a fact already verified by history. She turned and caught the gleam of the cross in the fading light. "Oh, so it is. I think it must be following us. Unless that's the killer." The doctor chuckled softly. "Don't be silly. Monks are peaceful. Well, some are." The road bent, and with it came the bitter scent of diesel, mixed with the green pungency of nettles. Yet beneath it lingered a faint lavender perfume, sour and spoiled. Penny's nose wrinkled. She remembered Margaret's garden, the flower pots by the wall, and the accusations thrown about. Cats, strays, something feral. The truth pulsed unspoken between them. It had never been a cat, and, dear reader, I regret to inform that I have told you bullshit. Richard's face, wan and troubled, held secrets heavier than his bones. Shame makes a lodger of itself in the body, and Richard had been its host ever since. He could not speak the confession now, but it pressed inside him all the same. It was he who had defiled the pots, not any beast. His illness had left him bent and strange, and in darker moments compulsion had driven him into acts he scarcely remembered but could never forget. Margaret, who had blamed the ferals, had been wrong in the facts, but right in the intuition of ruin. The church spire grew larger, its crooked finger stabbing at the heavens with the indignation of a lifelong Orthodox Christian who has just been diagnosed with cancer. And in the doctor's mind there unfolded a roll call not of men, but of monsters, a catalogue of wrecks to rival the ships of the Achaeans mustered beneath Ilios. First came the Eax Urna, ship of cysts, with her bile-green pennant flapping across the blood moons of Grag. She had carried a crew who harvested tides as though they were organs, but her sails had been torn away in firestorms above Centauri's. Then the Susurrant of Slimes, who sang bioacoustic hymns that made whole oceans panic. Her hull had folded inward, crushed by the weight of a star's death throes. There was the long kelp fold, her body a tangle of living seaweed, whose masts were spines, each creak the groan of something half-plant, half-beast. The Rangus of vellum, her seams stitched like scar tissue, her decks smelling of parchment left too long in water. She had drowned quietly, her records lost in silt. The Necker Rotunda and her cousin, the Hellebore band, shells gleaming in alien moonlight, had gone down locked in each other's embrace, a joint grave at the edge of a nebula. The tremor of Vrax, bellied and broad, carried whole quarantined cities in her bowels. She was too heavy to flee, and was swallowed when her sun erupted. The little Litot, smallest and cruelest, whose modest shape disguised a plague engine, had been pierced by a single torpedo, silenced almost before her irony was noticed. The orthograph of Rage and her twin, the mnemonic, ships that taught planets to misremember themselves, had imploded under the paradox of their own lies. And lastly, the Salter of Anchors, the flagship, whose hull sang with gravity wells, had descended into a black hole, her hymn still echoing in space-time like the ringing of a bell heard only by physicists in dreams. All gone, all but one, the ship that had no catalogue entry, that survived its brethren's ruin, a ship without a fleet, carrying within it a survivor who named himself the Soothsayer. He had drifted across centuries and taken on disguise, a monk's robe, a cross around the neck, and the patience of stone. The party passed through the lich gate. The air was damp with moss and old lichen. Gravestones tilted like old teeth gnawed by the earth. A rook called once and flapped away, its wings a ragged black flag. Penny stopped short, breath hissing. "My God, there's a lot!" "Yes!" the doctor exclaimed, already kneeling. His eyes lit up as the sonic screwdriver hummed into life. "It's impossible." "What, Doctor?" Penny asked, her voice sharp. "Some of these bones are centuries old." "They can't be," Richard protested, voice shaking. "This has been going on for a very long time," the doctor muttered, scanning a jawbone as though it might reply. The screen glowed with unreadable figures, flickering between numbers and symbols. "Doctor, look!" Penny cried. "The monk is carrying a gun." The doctor's head jerked up. He saw the glint of metal in the hooded figure's hand. "Quick! Into the church!" They ran, feet scattering gravel. The monk's pace did not quicken. He merely advanced, inevitable. But as the doctor swept the sonic across a long femur, the world tilted. Reality itself groaned as though bent by an unseen lever. The faction paradox had entered, not in bodies or in time, but in concept. The air thickened with the taste of erasure, as if words themselves were being unwritten. Let capital script E be the universe of events. Each little e in capital script E is of the form angle bracket T, comma, S, close angle bracket, where T belongs to capital T, the set of temporal indices, and S belongs to capital S, the set of state descriptors. Capital C is a function from script E to the power set of script E. F belongs to capital C of little e if and only if T of EF is less than T of little e. Introduce operator delta such that F belongs to capital C star of little e if and only if F delta little e. Axiom of paradoxical causality. For all little e in script E, if little e belongs to capital C star of little e, then there does not exist an F in script E, such that T of F is less than T of little e. Thus there exists a capital E subset of script E, such that for all little e in capital little e belongs to capital C star of little e. This generates a self-causal class, collapsing well-foundedness. There does not exist a relation prec such that the pair angle bracket capital T, comma, prec, close angle bracket is well-founded. Let predicate capital B of X mean X is a bone with age greater than 100 years. Normally, capital B of X if and only if bone of X and age of X greater than 100, factionally redefined. Capital B star of X if and only if capital B of X implies not capital B of X. Therefore, for all X, if capital B star of X, then not capital B of X, and hence the extension collapses the set of all X in script E such that capital B star of X is the empty set. The idea of bone had always meant the hardened structure remaining when flesh had gone, marked by the passage of years, sometimes centuries. But the faction, with their masks and drums and backwards prayers, reached into that idea and twisted. Now a bone was redefined. A bone could still be an osseous object, but by law of concept it could never be older than the moment in which it was observed. To say a bone was centuries old became impossible, like calling a square round. Any phrase that joined bone with antiquity collapsed into nonsense. Imagine then, the rule spelled out, for any object that belongs to the class of bones, its age is always equal to 0. If any object should both be a bone and bear an age older than 0, then it ceases to belong to the class of bones. Antiquity itself is expelled. The bones in the yard were still there, heavy and white, but their centuries had been erased. They were newborn in concept, ageless, contemporary. The doctor reeled. He felt it not in his eyes, but in his skull. Pressure behind the sockets, as though logic itself pressed inward. He knew the mark of faction work. It smelled like dictionaries rebelling and sweaty nerds. He tried to focus the sonic again, but the screen's numbers had been hollowed. What had been 200 years became 0 and 0 again and again. The tibia was the present tense masquerading as a bone. The jaw grinned, not with history, but with negation. Enough, the doctor whispered, though to whom he spoke it, his tool, the faction, the universe itself, was uncertain. The rook cawed again, unaware. The yard was still, yet inside the stillness the concept of bone had been rewritten, and though the world would heal, though definitions might creep back into place, the doctor understood the lesson. If concepts could be so vandalized, then the past itself was never safe, not even the concept of mavity. He pocketed the sonic, eyes still burning, and turned toward the church door. The church door stood before them, dark oak swollen with centuries of rain. Penny seized the handle and pulled, the hinges screaming. They stumbled inside, Margaret last, dragging Richard, who nearly fell on the threshold. The doctor whirled, sonic in hand, and jabbed it toward the lock. The screwdriver shrieked its note, blue light spilling into the wood. "Quickly, doctor! Lock the door!" Penny cried, clutching the handle as she twisted and shouted. "It won't work!" His voice cracked louder than the sonic. "Well, why not?" "It's wood." She stared at him. "Well, that's a bit pointless then." "Oi! Don't diss the sonic," he retorted, though the device itself buzzed in impotent fury. "Quick over here!" Penny snapped, dragging Margaret toward the altar. The doctor lingered at the door, grimacing, then dashed after them. The sonic's failure gnawed at him. He had always known it would not work on wood, but the why of it mattered. He could never accept the glib answer of, "It simply doesn't." No, it was ontology itself. The screwdriver was an instrument of relations. It read systems, exploited affordances, slipped into the interstices between mechanism and pattern. It told objects they were nothing more than the sum of their interactions. And it bargained with those interactions until doors yielded. But wood was not merely material. It was an object in the full sense given by philosophers who insisted everything is more than its relations. In object-oriented ontology, a wooden door was not reducible to grain and hinge, not capturable by frequency or vibration. It withdrew. It refused. The screwdriver's logic said, "You are what I can grasp, and I grasp you now." Wood's logic said, "I am more than you can ever grasp, and I will not answer your summons." The contradiction left the screwdriver buzzing. Thus they fled deeper, the nave stretching long as a corridor of memory. Pews hunched like sleeping witnesses. Candles, long extinguished, left greasy trails on brass holders. The air smelled of old stone, dust, and something faintly sweet, perhaps the remnants of a large Toblerone. At the altar, the doctor skidded to a halt. On the pulpit sat a book, its spine cracked, its pages warped with damp. He knew it instantly, either or Kierkegaard's great dissection of existence. The choice between the aesthetic life of pleasure and the religious life of devotion. His fingers brushed the cover, his mind splitting even as danger pressed. The aesthetic man seeks the beautiful, the immediate, the thrill of possibility. How many centuries had he lived in that mode, running from star to star, from catastrophe to catastrophe, delighting in puzzles and jests, tasting the universe as though it were a banquet laid for him alone. He had been moth and flame both. The religious man embraces paradox, kneels before the absurd, accepts that Abraham may raise the knife and still be righteous, that life required faith not in logic but in impossibility. Was that not what Tiresias had once warned him, that one day he might wield the swords of Rassilon, forbidden weapons, in an obedience more dreadful than sin? To choose the religious life was to surrender reason for paradox. And yet, what was he? Not one, not the other, but something else. Doctor, the third term. To run, to mend, to refuse final categories. He had lived in the space between either and or, in the corridor where both bled into one another. He pressed his palm to the book, as if it might pulse with an answer. The door groaned. The monk entered. Its hood brushed the lintel. Its cross swung once, twice, then stilled. And in its hand glimmered the gun. Margaret gasped and shrank back. Richard gave a broken cry, almost a whimper. "Ah," he managed, voice cracking. The doctor raised his hand, stepping forward. "Stop! Who are you?" The monk's voice was guttural, resonant, as though the very air warped to contain it. "I am your worst nightmare." The doctor narrowed his eyes. "Who are you?" The figure pulled back its hood, and the disguise sloughed away like a curtain. Skin shivered into a pattern of red suckers, eyes gleamed reptilian, the mouth widened in an amphibian sneer. "I am a Zygon, Doctor Who." Penny's hand shot to the doctor's arm. "Are you all right, Doctor?" Yes, I'm fine, he said, voice calm though his hearts raced. What are you doing here? I am here for revenge. With who? With you, Doctor. The doctor straightened, his coat swaying, his voice steel. I know in the past and the future I've fought Zygons many times, but they died, and that was many years ago. I am the last Zygon doctor, it declared, standing tall. I am what they call the soothsayer. The soothsayer? His breath caught, the name like ash in his mouth. I survived when our plan was to recolonize Earth with Zygons. But you interfered, and you almost destroyed us. I went to return, but full of anger. I promised myself to hunt and kill the doctor. Penny stepped forward, her voice incredulous. Wait a minute, how long have you been on Earth for? Nearly 3 centuries waiting for the doctor. And now you've got him, she said, her eyes darting between the alien and her friend. Yes, the Zygon hissed, raising the gun. And I'll kill him right now. The knave froze, the cross on the Zygon's chest gleamed cold, mocking all human piety. Margaret clutched her bag as if it might shield her. Richard trembled, the shame of the flower pots boiling inside him, wanting to confess yet knowing there was no time left for absolution. Penny set her jaw, eyes flicking for exits that did not exist. The doctor stood at the altar steps, the Kierkegaard open behind him to be left forever unread, just as it deserved. He inhaled slowly. He had smiled in worse places, and he smiled now, not in mockery, not in bravado, but to keep his hands from shaking. The Zygon's finger tightened on the trigger, and the moment balanced, heavy as stone. The nave itself seemed to lean forward, listening. The pews held their breath, the altar waited. Richard did a little fart. The soothsayer aimed. The doctor, last of the Time Lords, stood in the line of fire. And the story, obedient to its own suspense, concluded in the unyielding aim of the Zygon's gun, prepared to shoot him dead.